Well, I'd like to start by welcoming Faith to the program this evening. We are delighted to have her here. I have been in a number of classes where Faith has mentioned some portion of her work that she is going to discuss this evening, and we will let her share exactly how this came about in her life and work. But Faith is a doctor of entomology from the University of Arizona. She has a master's degree in botany and zoology from the University of Oklahoma, a bachelor in zoology from Connecticut College, and an MBA from the University of Delaware. So many educational accolades. And yet, it is the work that she has done on, I guess I would say, birds and bees and plants that has led her to the story that she's going to share with us this evening. So I'm delighted to welcome Faith, and we look forward to hearing about Three Potter's Fields.
Well, thank you very much for the introduction, Sue, and thank you all for spending a rainy and dreary Thursday night listening to a presentation about graveyards. But anyway, this project has been quite a journey for me, and so I will weave that in with a discussion about the actual Three Potter's Fields that I'll be talking about. First, let's make sure advance is not working here. Okay. Sue, I'm pressing the up and down arrows and let me try this, and I'm not getting it. Oh, here we go. Very good.
There you go.
So let's start with some definitions. What is a potter's field relative to a cemetery or a graveyard? And you can see the definitions there. And a potter's field is actually a very specific definition for a pauper's grave, and it's a place for the burial of unknown, poor, unclaimed, or indigent people. And the origins of the term potter's field actually come from scriptures. It says in Matthew that Judas returned the 30 pieces of silver that the high priest gave him to betray Jesus. His conscience was bothering him, and so he returned the coins, and the high priest said that this was blood money. And they couldn't return that money to their treasury. They had to do something else with the money. So they purchased basically a hole in the ground that potters had extracted clay from, and used that as a burial ground for poor people. So that is in the scriptures. That is the origin of the word potter's field, and it's been with us for many years. If we look at the three potter's fields that I'm going to be talking about today, you can see here's an aerial view of the Herman Holloway campus. This campus is the headquarters of the Department of Health and Social Services. It's the old Blandy farm for those Delawareans. I'm going to use my arrow here just to get you oriented. On the far left side, my arrow is coming down the I-295 connector, and the arrow follows along, and then you're going to go over the Delaware Memorial Bridge. Up here, going up to the right, this is Route 13, the DuPont Highway that goes north and south. This is the entrance here to the Herman Holloway campus. So this is the first one here, the Newcastle County. They're ordered just because it's easier going down the map here. The Newcastle County Potter's Field, the Delaware Hospital Cemetery or Spiral Cemetery, And then the third one is the Newcastle County Hospital, or also called the Farnhurst Pottersfield. And then what I have number 4 here is Planting Hope. And we'll talk about Planting Hope in just a second, but I want you to notice that Planting Hope is just adjacent to the Delaware Hospital Cemetery. Okay, just a quick overview of the first Pottersfield that we're going to be talking about. Approximately 776 people were buried here between 1891 and let me do the normal view, and 1983. It's a very unusual pattern, circular. You usually see cemetery rows in cemeteries in straight rows. But shortly after the time of the Civil War, circular cemeteries were popular. And this is a potter's field for former residents of the Delaware State Hospital. The name of this has gone through a number of changes. It was originally called the Delaware Hospital for the Insane. Then it was called the Delaware State Hospital. Now it's called the Delaware Psychiatric Center. But people who were in the hospital and died in the hospital and had no relatives or no means, no monetary means for burial, they were buried here. Along with a couple employees actually, who died during the TB outbreak, and their bodies were not allowed to be removed from the campus. The restoration of this cemetery took 6 years, from 2010 through 2016, and that's not because we had, tall redwoods to fell. This was all working through a lot of administrative issues, a few of which I'll touch on when we talk about this in more detail. And this particular cemetery does have a historical marker. Okay, so how did this all begin, and how did I ever get involved in the cemetery business? I worked until I retired about 2 years ago. I worked for the Delaware Department of Agriculture and headed up the plant industries section. And I grew up on a farm, and I'm a lifelong lover of gardens. And in April of 2010, my boss, the Secretary of Agriculture, came into my office one day and said that he and the Secretary of the Department of Health and Social Services had a great idea. And they thought that there should be a garden on the Herman Holloway campus for the patients, the clients of the psychiatric center. And they thought I was just the person to do it. And he said, not too big, just 1 acre. And I'm thinking, just 1 acre. So anyway, I was put in touch with the superintendent of grounds for the Herman Holloway campus to go and find a suitable acre of land for this garden. And he drove me around a couple different places, and I gave him my requirements, lots of sun, access to water, relatively flat, somewhat central, so people could see this garden. And he came upon this spot, and he said, well, this sort of met all the requirements. And then he told me that behind all of these trees was a cemetery. And he really wanted to do something about the cemetery, and, tried this way and that way, and nothing really happened, but this was still on his mind. So I liked the spot, so I chose it, and I'll just take you on a real quick infomercial, if you will, about the garden that has been developed over the past 10 years. We have market gardens and a CSA. CSA is community supported agriculture, where you buy a box once a week or once a month, whatever, of produce in season. We have community gardens. These are for the clients at the psychiatric center, also for employees of the campus and members of the public. This is our head shed, if you will. Client programming. In the past, I did client programming with the psychiatric center. Someone who worked for a while did programming with the psychiatric center and with the Terry Children's Center. We worked with the art therapist to do a number of different garden-related projects. I also found somebody to start an apiary on campus, the Planting Hope Apiary. Those of you who are familiar with Patramenteris might recognize this is one of their wreaths, which for many years I've hung on the garden gates at Christmas time. And in 2016, on the far eastern end of the garden was a memorial garden was established, and this was great. This gave us handicapped access. Here's a monument that was erected for the memorial garden. And after I retired in 2018, the Department of Health and Social Services said, we want to continue planting hope, and how about if you work as a contractor and figure out sort of like the next steps for that. So I'm currently in the process of doing that. Right now, there are two different organizations working here. Bright Spot Ventures, which manages the market garden and the CSA. And there's Sindhu Siva there in the middle with Bright Spot Ventures. And then on the far left is Ron Wright, Planting to Thrive. And he manages the community gardens and works with he and his wife, who are both peer support specialists, work on the programming with the Delaware Psychiatric Center. And so in the process of transition, we're developing a new mission, but that's basically what Planting Hope is all about. So back to the spiral cemetery. You can see here, this is a relatively old photograph, but in the back you can see the circle, and that's the original location of the, not the original, the spiral cemetery was originally located on another place in campus, but as they needed room for buildings, they moved it way to the back of the campus. So what you'll see, my arrow, if you see in the back here, this is actually in the freight train line that ran along the Christiana River way in the back of the campus. And you see this little circle here, that's where the spiral cemetery is. So anyway, we will, hang on a second. Okay. And when I located the Planting Hope, like right across from this spiral cemetery, some people said to me, well, that's pretty creepy. And to have a cemetery right next to a garden. And I actually see it differently. The garden's life cycle mirrors the cemetery's symbolism of life's full cycle. Like seeds, we grow and form roots and branches. Hopefully we found fertile soil and will bear fruit in our lives. And when our season's over, we fade and return to the earth to nourish yet another cycle of life. So I think it's important to think about a garden and the cycle of life, like we can think about if we consider what a cemetery can symbolize. And actually, there was a period of time where picnicking in the cemetery was just, the al fresco thing to do. And since many municipalities didn't have proper recreational areas, many people had picnics in their local cemeteries. And one of the reasons why eating in the cemeteries became a fad was that there were epidemics raging across the country. And I thought this was really interesting relative to our COVID-19 situation and, outside and social distancing. Yellow fever and cholera were prevalent, and so death was a constant visitor for many families. And in cemeteries, people could talk and take a break and talk and break bread with family and friends, living and deceased. So anyway, thinking about cemeteries as part of life is something that we really don't do so much in our culture, but I think there's a lot to be said for that. Okay, so then comes along July, so just a few months after I began planting hope, this very large backhoe appeared and gnawed away that all those trees in front of the cemetery. Now, I've looked at successive aerial views of the spiral cemetery, and starting around 1954, a line of trees appeared around the circle of the spiral. And I know enough about botany to know that trees don't grow in a straight line, especially a straight line that forms a rectangle or a square. So somebody had to plant all of those trees to hide the cemetery. And but it was decided to remove all those trees, which was great. Some of you may recall that the Delaware Psychiatric Center was, I guess sued would be the right word, by the US Department of Justice for a lot of violations of their care for the mentally ill. This happened right around this time, and a lot of changes were required of the psychiatric center. So people were brought in to make those changes happen, and they were very aggressive in promoting the case of the rights of people with mental illness. And so I'm sure removing the trees was part of that. Well, anyway, on this particular day, I came out to the garden with my garden group. These were a bunch of people from the psychiatric center, and they had an interest in garden, and they would come out in the garden with me every week, and we do different things. And this particular day, they came out and they saw this, and they stood there and they looked at this, and they were just frozen there looking at this. And so they wanted to go across the little road and take a look at it. Everybody was very quiet. They were usually pretty chatty, but they were very quiet. And so finally, one man spoke, and he said, "This is what they think of us." And for me, this was like, a knife to the heart, because what could I say? I mean, he clearly saw this for what it was. And so I told the people there with me that, I really didn't think it was right, the way that cemetery had been hidden and forgotten. And because it was hidden and forgotten, there were all kinds of crazy stories about exactly what it was. And so I said to them, you know, I'm going to make a promise to you. I don't know how or when, but I'm going to do something about this. And I'm going to make sure that this is recognized and maintained as a proper cemetery. So that's how I got started with this particular cemetery and with cemetery number 1. Okay, so here, again, about this time, there was a program started with St. Elizabeth's. And St. Elizabeth's, which opened in 1855, was the first federally funded asylum. And in 2009, they dedicated a memorial. This was to the graves of more than 4,500 psychiatric patients who were buried there. And so this was kind of part of a national movement to recognize the graveyards in the state mental hospitals that were scattered around the country. Now in Delaware, in the 60s, when a lot of these state hospitals either closed down or changed hands, and in Delaware, we still maintain that property, but in some states, the property was sold off to somebody else. And so there started a national movement to honor the people who were buried there, and in most cases, forgotten. This is I think, a very powerful statement from the National Association of Mental Health Program Directors. And basically they're saying that in forgetting and neglecting these graves, it really sends a message of devaluing the people who struggled with mental illness. And it really contributes to the burden of stigma that they face. And I really think that's true. And I could certainly see that in the cemetery at the Delaware Psychiatric Center. And clearly those men who were standing there with me on that day, I mean, they felt it in their hearts. So that was really something that I felt that I didn't know how, but I was going to do something about. So with all of that said, I pulled together some people who were interested in this cemetery and doing something about the cemetery. It was facilities people from the Herman Holloway campus. It was people from the Division of Substance Abuse and Mental Health. It was a couple master gardeners, just people who felt really moved and motivated to do something about this cemetery. And as I said, it took quite a long time, to 6 years to kind of work through all the logistics. But anyway, we kept at it. So why restore these cemeteries? As I mentioned before, it reflects a lack of dignity and respect for people who are our fellow human beings. In looking at what was done in some of these cemeteries.
I'm on, but I can't hear again.
I'm sorry. Can everybody else hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Maybe whoever couldn't hear, maybe log out and log back in. That seems to fix a lot of ailments.
Hold on 1 second.
Okay, so pardon me. Another thing, if veterans are buried in the cemetery, their service should be honored. And restoring these cemeteries can help to change the way people view people with mental illness, the poor, the indigent, and to treat them with more dignity and respect. And it's also an issue of empowerment, because many of the people who were buried here, they struggled and they had no voice. They had no family. They had no advocates. So these are some of the reasons why it's important to restore these cemeteries. So after all of that, when it came time to have a dedication of the cemetery and the historical monument, we sort of pulled out all the stops. Here's the monument that was built. It's not your typical cemetery monument. It's a beautiful mosaic tile. All of the tiles in that monument were created by people who live with mental illness. The man on the right, who was the artist who envisioned this monument and designed it, actually had spent some time in the Delaware Psychiatric Center. And for him, this was something like the pinnacle of his career, to have gone through the many years of struggle with instability and to come out of it and to create something like this was so powerful for him. And over here, my pointer, there's my pointer. You see this here. What this is a register of names. The photo that you saw previously was just a bunch of markers in a circle, and they all had a number on them. They didn't have a name. And we thought, and in the community who was advocating for restoring these cemeteries, they thought it was really important that it not just be a number, it be a name. And I understand that completely. So there's the register of names. And this was really quite a big thing. And so we made the best celebration we could. I was able to get in touch with the twin poets who wrote a poem just for this occasion. And I found this quote about they provide healing through art, and that's kind of the focus of their artistic journey. And when I explained the cemetery, I mean, they understood it immediately. And so they wrote a really wonderful poem for the event. We even got the state police bagpipes out there playing Amazing Grace. That was something pretty special. And there are 3 veterans buried in the Spiral Cemetery, and so we wanted a way to honor them. And the gentleman in the middle there with the sunglasses, he worked in the mail room at the psychiatric center, and he liked to come to Planting Hope to buy vegetables. And we started talking one thing and the other. And he is a member of the War Dogs Association that honors dogs that have been in service. So he offered LT, his German Shepherd, to come and honor the 3 veterans buried there. So, you know, and you've got bagpipes and dogs and poets and so on and so forth. You've really got quite a celebration. For which you might notice I wore my blue suede shoes. So anyway, here's the historical marker. And that was in 2006. And you see now the vegetation has matured around it quite a bit. So it's really come into itself. It looks quite good now. And at the same time, and actually she was a member of our Friends of the Potter's Field, Kathy Detweiler. Her husband was one of the directors in the director of one of the divisions in the Department of Health and Social Services. And one day, one of the cleaning people came up to him with some old books. And he said, well, I know your wife is interested in history and anthropology, and she might like these. And actually what they were old journals or books from the former state hospital that had patient records, and they were about to be thrown out. And so she spent 4 years transcribing 7 hospital ledgers that detailed the admission and clinical notes for more than 3,000 patients who were admitted to the hospital between 1894 and 1920. And so she took this information, she searched all kinds of available newspaper records, she searched out relatives and Facebook, so on and so forth. And this book has stories of the lives of people who are in the state hospital. And her book shows that every patient came from somewhere and had meaningful lives before, during, and in some cases after their time at the Delaware State Hospital. And she portrays them as real individuals. And it's very moving to read it because, you know, these are people, many of whom are buried at the Spiral Cemetery, and they're not just a number, but they're a person, and it talks about their life. So that was a very interesting. It's a very interesting book. It's available, but a great bit of historical research, and certainly relevant to us here in Delaware. So on to the second Potter's Field. This one is managed by the Indigent Burial Program. For many, many years, the state of Delaware has operated an indigent burial program. And this is for either people who are coroner's cases, people who are found dead and have no family members, and people who have no means of paying for a funeral. The state has a program whereby they can be buried. And at this particular location, the burial started in 1979, and you can see there's a little shed there, and that is behind the Herman Holloway campus. Well, it's on the Herman Holloway campus, but it's behind the main set of buildings. And if you've ever gone along the Markel Trail, you can see this along the Markel Trail. I'll talk a little bit more about it. But how did I get involved in this one? Well, one day, and this was while I was still working on the Spiral Cemetery, one day I received a call from Governor Markel's office, and somebody had complained because this Potter's Field was just a mess of overgrown vines and everything, and it was just infested with these horrible insects. And what was I going to do about it? And so first of all, I figured out this horrible insect was, you know, the cicada killer. The time of year, you know, the cicadas are active, the cicada killers are active. I can't just say, you know, okay, Governor Markel, chill. This is just, you know, this is the way it is. So anyway, I went, I talked to the woman who was in charge of the indigent burial program, who also happened to be on my Friends of the Potter's Field, talked about the cemetery. And she said, well, yes, we really should do something about it, so on and so forth. So we formed another Friends of the Potter's Field, or we became the Friends of the Potter's Fields, because now there are 2 of them to worry about. The one with all the cicada killers and the Spiral Cemetery. And so we got some people together to do cleanup. Here's what it looks like this is Baylor Women's Prison here. As part of the cleanup, we planted a whole bunch of rows of Sharon around the perimeter so it wouldn't look quite so stark from the Potter's Field. We got the facilities people found some benches, and so we made it look a little more proper. In the process, as time went on, I realized all the rows of Sharon were gone. And so I asked what happened and was told that they died. I don't believe that because I went out and looked where they were all planted and it was a clear-cut saw mark to the ground level. So I know they got cut down. So anyway, they, guilt took over them. And so they put this shade screen there to at least make some kind of buffer between the Potter's Field and Baylor Women's Prison. While we were getting ready to do this, plans really geared up for converting the industrial track, the Delaware Greenway. This is the connector between downtown Wilmington and historic Newcastle. And so this was one of the shovel-ready projects that happened during the Great Recession. And so this was great because, I could tell the powers to be, look, you've got to do something about the cemetery because you're going to have bikers and walkers and everybody's going to be going by and they're going to see that this cemetery is really poorly kept. I mean, that building that I showed you previously that had the sign on it, there was no sign on it. The door had bullet holes in it. It had, paint thrown against the building. It was a mess. So anyway, one thing and the other, we were able to make some inroads along this way. And the director of the division that houses the indigent burial program took interest in what we were doing and said, well, you're doing this for Newcastle. We need to do this for the Delaware Hospital for the Chronically Ill in Smyrna. And we need to do this for the Stokely Center in Georgetown. And we need to have a monument where we have the name of the person and the marker number. And so somehow or other, they found the money. And so this monument was installed, and you see here all it's you really can't see anything specific, but on the left column is the marker number, and then on the right column for each of these columns is the name of the person. And there's some of these, that you just kind of stop and look. Here's two of them, Christiana Hospital babies. So these are basically stillborn babies, and they have, they're just for whatever reason left there. And so they collect a number of them and bury them in one of these plots. So so that's the second one. Now let's move on to the third. And this is the most recent one. And the Newcastle County Almshouse and Hospital served as a home for destitute people. Here, the state provided shelter, food, and basic medical care. From 1891 until 1933, the Newcastle County Hospital, the Newcastle County Hospital, also called the Farnhurst Potter's Field, was the burial grounds for people who died in the almshouse and hospital. It also served as the Potter's Field for the indigent of Newcastle County and those without family or means for a proper burial. And this is a picture of the almshouse is here on the left, and then the Delaware State Hospital is here on the right. This building still exists. This is the main administration building of the Delaware Department of Health and Social Services. The Alms House was burned down. I forget the exact date, but that's long gone. And so what happened in 1958, the Wilmington Morning News stated that the Delaware Highway Department was planning to make a connector between this, when the interstate, large interstate construction projects were going on. They were going to make a connector from 95 to the Delaware Memorial Bridge. And the road was planned to go right over the top of this Farnhurst Potter's Field. And so anyway, this news article said that the State Highway Department, which made these plans, wasn't going to be ruthless about the old Potter's Field. It was going to erect a marker describing the Potter's Field and the number of people buried there. Well, they said they tried to find relatives of people buried there, but all but one of the books recording the people buried there and their marker number and everything else were lost. So they had no way of contacting anybody. They put an article in the newspaper and nobody responded. So they said, well, we're going to build our road anyway, but we're going to put a marker there. But anyway, so nothing ever happened. And over time, construction debris and trash accumulated. Now you see here, the road goes right over most of the cemetery. There's only about 300 or 400 of the almost 2,400 graves that are still visible. The rest were buried under 20 feet of concrete, dirt, and who knows what else. Okay, so anyway, over time, construction debris and trash accumulated, trees and vines grew entangled, covering up the graves, and the only hint of the cemetery was an exterior chain link fence. And this cemetery was on the radar of Kathy Detweiler, who wrote that book that I told you about. Also, Hal Brown, who was a retired Delaware State medical examiner. And they said to me, well, you really need to do something about this cemetery too. So I kind of put it off because this was sort of like the most complicated one. Anyway, this is Hal Brown put together a very interesting video about the Potter's Fields in Newcastle County. And he talks a little bit about the almshouses and how they were really the only choice available for a number of people who lived in pretty dire circumstances. Anyway, since all the records were lost, Hal Brown and Kathy Detweiler together tried to reconstruct a list of who was buried there by going through certificates of death. And so they basically, if the certificate of death said Farnhurst Potter's Field, they worked backwards to see where they buried in the Spiral Cemetery, or were they buried someplace else. And anyway, they've identified about half of the people buried there based on the certificates of death. And so about the same time that Hal and Kathy were kind of asking me if I would please do something about this third cemetery, Senator McBride, who is he's just finishing out his many years as president pro tem of the Delaware Senate. He wanted to make sure that all of the cemeteries in his district, which is Senatorial District 13, were properly taken care of. And so he was kind of working on his end, and I was kind of working on my end. And so together, we were able to do a cleanup of this place. And then in November of this, just earlier this month, a couple Sundays ago, we, in a really torrential rainfall, we had a historical marker dedication. I was very honored that Camilla and Greg came to the event. And in this cemetery, there are also Civil War veterans buried. It's difficult to find the exact name of a lot of them, again, because the records of who was buried there were lost, and the people of the records we could find, you have some names like John Gray. And if you look up Civil War veterans in Delaware, you know, there are about 20 John Grays. And so it's hard to track it down. However, newspaper articles of the time did say that there were several Civil War veterans buried there. But anyway, we honored them and their service by placing flags at the dedication ceremony. And I just want to kind of wind down here, close out with some discussion about, you know, the mindset of Potter's Field. These are some of the attitudes that I encountered, and I know they're out there. You know, the idea that no one would visit the graves, the Newcastle County Potter's Field, for a while, or at least when I started out, it was locked. You couldn't get in there. And if you had, if you knew somebody who was buried there, there's no way you could even get there. And plus, because it was next to Baylor, there were always guys there with guns that wanted to know what you're going to do. Even, you know, when we showed up with our shovels and daffodil bulbs to plant some bulbs. So anyway, that's part of the mindset. And, you know, providing headstone or any other kind of marker was too expensive. You know, a lot of these people led troubled lives. It's just best to forget them. And that Potter's Fields are in the way. I mean, that's an example of the I-295 connector. And if you Google, you know, interstate over graveyard, you'll see that that this has happened in other states as well. And so these cemeteries, they're viewed in the way, and going around them doesn't seem to be an option. I want to say just a couple things about of that. You know, the fact that no one would come to visit them, or no one cares. I visit these cemeteries on a somewhat regular basis just to see what's going on, and people leave things, and they might, to go by the numbered marker, which you see here. Suddenly you see somebody had a stone made, and then you see some flowers by there. This one I thought was really touching, on that big granite monument that you saw. One day I saw a little butterfly by somebody's name. And so somebody had come and had found that name, and it had put the butterfly there. Find a Grave is a website that it's kind of a central website for cemeteries. And there's some very dedicated people in all over the place, but in Delaware, who have been trying to put together little stories about some of the people buried in these Potter's Fields. So this particular person was buried here. You can see in Delaware State Hospital. He's buried in the Spiral Cemetery. They were able to find a picture of him. Here's his marker number. And on Find a Grave, you can also put the death certificate. And you see here flowers. Somebody left virtual flowers, if you will, for this person. So, you know, they might live in California or who knows where, but they can still, through this website, put a little memorial, which I thought was very interesting. And for people doing genealogy research, something like this is really invaluable. That one Potter's Field that I showed you has 995 graves. It's filled up. So now they are planting markers and people all around the perimeter of the Spiral Cemetery. So here are some of the very recent graves. It's, you know, it's really basic, if you will. There's, you know, there's the name plaque, and then the vault is put there. Couple days ago, 2 days ago, I made a visit because I wanted to get a couple updated or better photos for the presentation. And they were in the process of burying somebody. And I saw these two people standing there, and, you know, I felt like, well, I don't know, should I bother them or whatever? And so I went through the gate down to the other Potter's Field and actually found somebody who wanted to come to this funeral. Anyway, the burial was very short, and they wouldn't allow the people up to where they had the big machine to bury the vault. And these two people said to me when it was cleared that they could go see the new grave, they said to me, "Would you come with us?" And so I said, "Okay, sure." And there was no ceremony or anything. And this lady here was a social worker who worked with the individual who was being buried. The man here was head of a homeless shelter and had worked with this man. And so we went to the grave, and they knelt down and they put their hands on the little marker and had some things to say. It was really very moving. And I mentioned that I stop by at least once a week to see the cemetery, and they said, "Oh, that was good because, you know, now Jerry was the man's name. Now Jerry knows that someone will be coming to see him." And so, you know, for me, it was just really moving. And from what they told me, this man had a challenging life. I suspect he also had mental health issues. But you know, to be given a proper place to be buried, as unglamorous as it is, you know, to me that's very important. So now that these three Potter's Fields have been recognized and sort of on the radar of maintenance, you can't just leave it there because it'll just go back to or could easily tend to go back to chaos. So I've been trying to gather some people who might be interested in the Friends of the Potter's Fields, just to do a couple simple things. For one thing, you know, if people are interested in actually touring these Potter's Fields and seeing them, that's something I would be very happy to do. A biannual cleanup and work days and flower planting, you know, just something simple So it looks like somebody cares. And also on Veterans Day, this beautiful mosaic monument, there was an issue, major issue with the firing of the clay, and it's deteriorated. So as part of my continuing involvement, I've got them to redesign the monument. And so there's a new foundation there. They're going to put back this plaque that has the numbers and the names. And then on the opposite side, there are going to be tiles with all the current burials that are being buried around the spiral cemetery. Remember, I told you that there are all these graves going to be buried around it. So those people need to be acknowledged as well. And then every Veterans Day, I go and put fresh flags on all the veterans' graves. So there might be other people who would be interested in doing that as well. And so I'd like to end with, this 10-year journey of mine, some of the lessons for life that I've learned, and share them with you. First of all, death releases the body, but not the prejudices. And this marker is in the Newcastle County Potter's Field, and it talks about returning to dust. And so your body is released, but not the prejudices. And in Delaware, it wasn't until the 1960s that segregation in cemeteries was ended. And this, I had quite a trouble wrapping my head around this. But many white cemeteries didn't serve blacks or restricted black burials to separate sections. If poor indigent African Americans were not a member of a black church with a graveyard, they had few options for burial. So for many black people, these Potter's Fields were the only place that they could be buried. And so the fact that they were so poorly taken care of really kind of compounds the prejudices. Another thing, thou shalt not steal dignity. A couple weeks ago, Greg, in one of Greg's sermons, he mentioned about, he was talking about the 10 Commandments, and he mentioned about stealing, and that stealing dignity. Don't let someone steal your dignity, but stealing another person's dignity is a really sort of high crime, I guess you would say. And so when I think about those cemeteries and the condition that they were in, their dignity had been stolen. And so providing some kind of recognition and some kind of flowers or some kind of upkeep does maybe a little something to restore their dignity. Another thing may sound counterintuitive, but you can advocate for the living by advocating for the dead. And, really advocating to restore the spiral cemetery was a great way of advocating for the dignity of people living with mental illness. As a matter of fact, we call our project the Dignity Project. And, as human beings, we all share so much. And so it's important to acknowledge the common bonds of our humanity. To enact outward change, you must be changed within. For me personally, I don't think I could have done all this unless I was changed by interacting with the people that I encountered at the psychiatric center. and having them show me the world through their eyes, how seeing that cemetery made them feel. So I think that was a powerful lesson for me. The journey to keep your promises can take you to some unexpectedly rewarding places, and that was a long journey to keep my promise, but it's been very rewarding for me. And then finally, if you think about it from a spiritual aspect, there's this verse from Matthew that whatever you do for the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you do for me. So that's also something I think about as I continue working with these cemeteries. So thank you very much for your attention. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them if I can.